we should have had the first hearing in the whole of New Zealand to lead it instead of other iwi coming in and taking the claims first, because he thinks that we have the best lead because of the treaty and the Hakaputinga document. It's like what some of the lawyers were just saying this morning, is that that the government's really relying on public opinion. If they play the game right, that like if they want to win Maori votes, that they'll have to play it right this time, because this is the first hearing that we've ever had. You know, the Treaty of Waitangi has never been heard before. Like from the Maori version, I think our side of the story needs to be heard, because our children for the future needs their history to be known. If we went directed, then there's no history to be told.
The claims process, well, I think it's it's a sin that we're even going through this process, because if you go back, and the intent of the treaty and what it stood for was between two peoples of an equal standing, and each would respect each other's customs and lands and their points of view. But that clearly hasn't happened, because now we have these treaty claims processes that we're going through that really is an indictment on the way in which the treaty has been upheld by one party over another. So, you know, now Maori are sort of fighting a rearguard action. I mean, it's quite easy to explain where they had, I think, something like 63 million acres, and now they only own 3. So that's a sad indictment on the partnership. I mean, just the treaty, as far as Maori are concerned, doesn't really exist in terms of day-to-day living. It exists as a document of intent, but that really, in their minds, and in reality, it hasn't been upheld. Well, stage 2 hearings, there's a stage 1 hearing which is about the validity of the Te Treaty and also the Whakaputinga document, which was a document of independence that was given down by King William way back in 1835 to the Maori. And but Te Treaty soon followed after that, and for Maori that was an endorsement of what was already agreed to. But stage 1 hearings is about the validity of the treaty and Whakaputinga. Now, some groups want to settle based on the findings of stage 1 hearings, which is purely the treaty itself. The whānau hapu participation comes from stage 2, where each hapu has to prosecute their own claims. So what they do is identify what they have lost, and they know it. They know what lands they've lost. They know the waterways that they've lost. They know their health and education disparities. All of these things they know, and they want their day in court to prosecute their claim. And you can't take that away from them. And if you go to stage 1 and go down to settling at that point, it negates stage 2. In other words, stage 2 gets thrown out the window.
Well, I'd like to say what I think the outcome ought to be. It ought to be that Maori people have had a fair chance to express what their claim is all about individually, each individual claim. I think that the government has underfunded the tribunal to a point where in Ngāpuhi and in other associated iwi around Taitokero, that can't happen. Ngāpuhi says there's 122,000 Māori, that's a quarter of the population of New Zealand, and the government has come along here and funded to the same extent, I suppose, as they've done to other parts of New Zealand where the tribes are probably a quarter of the size. And I don't really think that that's really very fair for claimants. I personally believe that from my past experience, I'm sick and tired of going into resource management, resource consent processes and saying what one believes is their true history and being laughed at and denigrated by people who know nothing about our history at all. And so I feel that the Waitangi Tribunal reports will in the end identify where claims are true and where there are definitely rights there for people who lived here in pre-European times, their families, their descendants. And so for me, I think that a worth of going to the hearing itself is that for once and for all, there will be an acknowledgement of what did belong to people's ancestors and what was lost subsequently in the last 170 years. Because my involvement in the likely loss of property rights was recent, about 30 years ago, and I think to myself, it happened in our time. Well, I feel that if anybody's out there negotiating without understanding the extent of the claim, they will settle for far less. And I also feel that that suits the government big time. It's part of our history to pay less. I mean, I'm looking at the South Canterbury Finance bailout of $1.6 billion. And I don't think that's 122,000 people. And I don't think their losses are to any extent the losses of what has been incurred in Tai Tokerau in terms of the treaty claims. I certainly support stage 2 of the hearings process, and I don't really support going off to government and settling without knowing the extent of the grievances.